and welcome to the Cut and the Dry here on the Life Given Radio. Today is going to be a little bit of a different episode because, I'm disorganized. And we could leave it there, but it's actually quite funny. So
it is. You should tell it.
Okay, well, I'll just tell a couple of things that happened this week. First off, I'm in a wedding in, I'm not sure how long because I don't know what time the wedding is. I just know that I need to be somewhere to get ready in an hour. But along with that, we did the best man and maid of honor toasts last night at the rehearsal dinner. And I was so disorganized and so behind schedule that I didn't even prepare my best man speech and I was forced to wing it. So you could only imagine what today's going to be like. So, all that said, we are going to do the format akin to our specials. So Isaac's got some questions. I will think of some questions as we go along for Isaac. And we're just going to talk a little bit today about dating and courtship.
Love is in the air. It's our Valentine's Day special. Oh. Boom. We're going to be releasing close enough, right?
All right.
When is Valentine's Day? I don't even know. Is that the 11th?
February 14th.
14th? Oh, okay. Well, then. It's a little early.
It's a little early. Love is not in the air because it's just two dudes sitting in the office. Sorry. I have it every time.
It doesn't have to mean that. It can just we're both married and we both...
I know. I'm sorry, Isaac. I don't know why I do this. It's really rude. Bottom line is, Isaac and I are pretty recently out of this stage of life, within the last couple of years for both of us. So we thought it would be fun to revisit this, ask each other some questions about it, and see how it happens. Just one more caveat before we proceed. I did get a concussion relatively recently, and I do have some minor brain issues. So,
dude, I didn't even know that.
Oh, yeah. It was a little over a week ago. I think.
Were you in a bar fight again, or?
I was not in a bar fight again. I fell off a ladder and landed directly on ye old Nog.
No, yeah, dude. I'm sorry.
I'm good. I think.
Ouch.
I don't know.
Okay.
But I'm just saying that as an excuse, as a preemptive excuse in case anything goes terribly wrong today. So
there's already built up, you've banked sympathy from the listener. Okay.
Exactly. That's what I'm here
So
for.
procrastination, but that and concussions. Yeah.
Exactly.
I have no such excuses.
Alrighty, well, shall we get started?
Let's do this.
Actually, I'll start with my the one question I did think of prior to this for you, Isaac. What do you think Christians ought to refer to the dating / courtship / biblical dating / whatever you want to call it? Okay. There are so many different words floating around, and in modern times, dating has gotten the connotation that it has in terms of sex after the third date or whatever. Right. And so it's difficult to use dating in a biblical fashion.
True.
Right? And so Christians have started to use courtship, and some would say biblical dating.
Right.
What do you think Christians should call this period before engagement in marriage?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I was going to ask you a similar question, but with kind of just dispelling some misconceptions around the dating courtship. And we probably need to define what dating and courtship are, and that's kind of what you're asking. Yeah. How should we understand those terms when it comes to starting a relationship?
Yeah, so I guess maybe it's two questions. How would you define those terms, and which do you think is the best one to use, or do you think there's a preference?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and say right off the bat, I think that you can... the style of courting should be tailored to the people that are actually doing the thing, right? That are actually involved in the relationship. And that doesn't mean just the man and woman courting. I think that there is some context to put into place there around that. So for dating / courting, I would say dating is a a term that you can use if you say if a young man goes and asks a young woman out and they go from there out, just the two of them, multiple times on dates, right? To go out romantically in romantic settings, but don't have a chaperone. They aren't in a group of friends. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. But the whole point behind courting is to get to know a person in context without, like if you want to get to know them better, there's an area for you to do that. And I think that's courting is kind of where that happens. So in friend groups, maybe you have each other over at your family's house for dinner, to understand and put them into context of where they are and who they are as a person. And this probably is the better route, I think, for someone that you may not know that well. Because I think you really want to know how they treat other people, especially their mom and dad and their siblings. Those are the people that are going to be their most genuine around, or you'll see them at their worst in some situations with the people that they love the most, in a sense. Sometimes they're more relaxed. So I would say,
and I'll just interject a note here, because I like the track you're on.
Okay.
I might loop back on some of the things you said that I might have a slightly different perspective. But one thing you mentioned is, so say you're a guy, you're probably a guy if you're listening to this, and you're courting a girl. One thing that I've heard lots of wise older guys say is how a girl relates to her dad is how she's going to relate to you, her husband, 5-10 years down the road. And if you're a girl, if you want to see how a guy is going to treat you, look at how he treats his mom. That's how you're going to be treated in 5 to 10 years. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's super interesting. And it's also interesting to think about from your perspective as a guy. Think about how do I treat my mom, and how am I going to treat my wife in 5 years? And you can get a snapshot of that in how you've treated your mother for the last 5 years or so. You just kind of look at that, evaluate that, and I think that's a really helpful tip for guys, at least, because I did that. I kind of took a snapshot, evaluated, and I picked out the things that I was like, I'm not really happy with that and that and that. So it's helpful in both ways. But yeah, did you have more to go?
No, I think we can just kick around with the basically whatever I just threw out on the table without really considering what I was talking saying. But let's kind of clear some of that out.
You want to clear the air a little bit? So I think maybe next we just define terms a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so you did. I guess you did define dating versus courtship. Right.
But I think they can be sharpened. Like, what do you think, or what were some of the things that you wanted to raise questions over what I said? Because I think that might just help sharpen the overall distinction between the two.
Yeah. So the one thing that I might differ with you a little bit, and this is why we're here to clarify, is you mentioned that courting is primarily for the benefit. I'm saying what it sounded like you were saying.
Yeah,
so
go for it.
You were saying that courting was primarily for the benefit of the two people courting to get to know the other person in context. And I would push back and say that the benefit of courting is that the two sets of parents get to watch what's going on, and they're going to see this with 20, 30 more years of experience. And be able to give valuable input, because 20 to 30 years is a lot of time. And they're going to have a lot more knowledge, wisdom, and input to give to the couple as they go along. And so the value from my perspective is not necessarily for the two people courting to get to know the other person in context, although I do agree with that entirely. I think that more broadly speaking, the benefit of it is that both families get to know the other family, and most importantly, the people in authority, at least the man in authority over the girl in the relationship. Generally, by the time a guy is out courting, he's moved out from under his parents' authority. But you're still in some sort of authority structure with your parents, whether or not you're still under their roof. So
Yeah.
I think that the value's there primarily. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, what I was saying was just kind of I think the thing that I tend to focus on when it came to that. My perspective through that whole process was
totally makes sense.
I'm courting Ruth, and this is that. Although we kind of moved beyond that fairly quickly, but I like that. I like that distinction or addition to what I was saying, because I think it really is courtship is the idea of moving it. Making it less about just two people and making it more about the families that are involved.
And by extension, rather than just making it about two people's feelings, you are making it about two families coming together in Christ. And then above that, you're making it about how does this impact the kingdom of God? Because that's obviously what matters. And so dating you can think of as kind of this dot on the scale, and courtship, as we're defining it, you can think of as like a reverse pyramid going up from these two people to their families, to their church community, to the kingdom of God. And you have these tiers that everything is being considered in biblical dating or biblical courtship, whereas in secular dating, all that's being considered is how do I feel about this person, and that changes faster than the weather, so it doesn't.
It's true.
Generally, doesn't end very well. So does that seem to clarify?
I think that's great. I think that. Do you think that there are any common misconceptions when it comes to courting? Because even though I think that's a pretty clarified position on courting, I've heard a lot of different takes when it comes to courtship. Sometimes I've heard of situations where the father is heavily involved in the courtship. In my particular courtship, Ruth's father, he was involved, but he did allow us to act as mature adults. So there is a balance there that I loved. But I think that there are very different models. So do you think that there are any common misconceptions that you would like to just dispel right off the bat, or do you think that there's beauty in the ambiguity?
I think there is some beauty in the ambiguity.
Okay.
However, for anybody listening who still thinks that courtship is equivalent to arranged marriages, you might want to just stop listening to this podcast. Sorry, no.
You do this. You do this every now and then, and that's why we lose half of our viewers. Because people take your advice.
Well, I mean, no. If you are in that boat, I will give a brief. I don't know. Is it worth it? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
You're worth it if you're listening. Arranged marriages are generally when the girl's family and the guy's family. It's different in certain cultures. So sometimes the girl's family just finds a dude.
Right.
And sometimes an arranged marriage is actually a transaction between a guy's parents and a girl's parents. I'm not sure where this rumor comes from, because it's so far disparate from Christian culture in modern times that this is something you see in the Near East primarily in modern times, but it's not really something that happens in Christian circles. I'm sure it does.
Yeah, there have been some cases of
but
it.
But I just want to clarify that that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I'll leave it at that for now, and I don't think there's any reason to pursue that further. Don't want people to think that's what we're talking about. Do you think I need to say anything else?
No, I think that's perfect. I actually want to ask you another question.
Okay.
So, speaking of pursuing, what do you think a young man has to have in order before he pursues a woman? I need to take another sip of that Red Bull.
I think it's time for me to open my second Red Bull. That's a great question. What do I think a man needs to have in order?
Also, once again, these questions are blind. We did not discuss these. I don't know if you mentioned that at the top of the show.
Yeah. But, no, I don't think I did.
Yeah, we kind of came into like in some of our other specials, we each prepared questions. Well, I prepared questions for Kip, so we can discuss. But this is one I was excited to hear about.
So Isaac, I hate that I always do this with your questions.
Don't do it. Just give something practical. Just say something practical.
I don't. I'm really bad at this because I would like to just answer this question and give you like, here's a checklist.
Right.
But as I'm thinking about it and thinking about the guys that I know and respect and how they entered their courtships and how I entered my courtship, different checklists entirely.
Right.
From my perspective, seeing a couple of the guys I know and watching when they got married, I would have been terrified with. So for me, one of the bigger priorities was income.
Right.
I really wanted to have a higher standard of stability before entering courtship. But for some guys, they're more frugal than I am. That's not as big of a consideration.
Right.
So I think there are a few major things that you need to think about. But you need to set your own target. And sometimes maybe your target is too low because you go ask a girl out, talk to her dad, and he's like, you make how much money a year?
Right.
Or you're still full-time in school and you work like part-time at McDonald's or whatever the case may be. And maybe you think, I got this. But if your standards are too low, the benefit of courtship is that you're going to get called out right away. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
There's nothing. That's what courtship is for. Is that if you're not ready, the dad's going to be like, I'm going to have to say, hold on, take care of this. So I wouldn't worry about what do you need to pursue somebody as much, if that makes sense, because that's what the person you're interested in's father is there to evaluate. And he'll evaluate that in whatever manner he chooses. And he knows best when it comes to his daughter. He knows what she needs, and you don't know that. So you may have set these standards in such a manner that you're comfortable with them, but the girl you're pursuing, if you got married, she wouldn't feel secure, and she wouldn't feel protected, and she wouldn't feel provided for. And so, and her dad's going to know that, and you're not. So you're going to need to tailor what you're prepared to do in accordance with who you're pursuing as well. And so all that to say, here's me explaining why I don't have just a practical answer. But there are a few categories of things that you need to consider.
Finally, we're there.
Pardon me, I have the Rhoda. I do not have the Rhoda. Don't worry. The first thing you need to consider is your spiritual well-being. And your friends, if you have good friends, this is a good place to get their help on. And about 6 to 8 months or so before I started dating my now wife, there were a couple things that a couple really close and good godly friends brought to my attention and told me that I needed to resolve before I got married. And they were absolutely right. And so I'm very grateful for that. And I think that's the first and foremost thing that you need to make sure is in order. Because, Jesus tells us to take the log out of our own eye before we move the speck from our brother's eye.
Amen.
And if we're supposed to be like Jesus to our wives, obviously we're not perfect. So but the bottom line is, if you're dealing with a long-term sin or just a serious sin that somebody's noticed, whatever the case may be, you want to resolve that before you take on the responsibility of someone else's sins and flaws. So spiritual health is number one. Number two is probably finances, because pretty much finances, I know I harp on finances a lot, and it's probably just because I am pretty focused on the career side of things.
Right.
But from my perspective, a lot of the other categories that a man needs to fulfill fall under this category. It enables, I mean, you know, maybe you don't make much money, but you weigh 250 pounds and are like 11% body fat. So you're just ripped. And so maybe, you know, I guess it probably didn't make sense where I was going with that when I started it. It made sense in my head, but
normally I'm like working along with you. I'm like, okay, I can jump in here, or I can tie that. I don't know what to do with that. That's just it's a loose ball of twine.
There was something else that I said internally, but that didn't come out of my mouth. And so I just realized that made no sense at all.
Right.
But finances cover a broad range of things. That's what I'm saying. Protection, provision, all of these things can fall under finances.
Right.
It's easier to fulfill all of those things under finances. The reason I talked about a buff dude is I was thinking about protection. I was thinking, if you're really ripped, then maybe you don't need as much money, you know?
Right.
I'm a scrawny dude. I need more money. It's a balancing act. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense.
It does. A little context goes a long way.
Oh, man. Anywho, I had a concussion. No.
Just to bring that back up.
Just to remind you, because I forgot. No. I don't know. There are certainly other things. Isaac,
right.
What things do you think I'm missing? Because I know I'm missing some.
Well, I think that's a good starting point. I like that you came back around, and because I mean, you often do give practical advice. There's that second Red Bull. It's time to get the show on the road. But I recently attended a wedding that Ty Knight was officiating.
Yeah.
And he gave a phenomenal homily, as always. He actually officiated Ruth's and mine. So we were one of his first three, I think.
Oh, nice.
And he mentioned at this wedding how Proverbs 31 is what, you know, we always look for, like when a young man's interested in a woman, he'll just go and read Proverbs 31. What he fails to recognize is that there are 30 other chapters that are dedicated directly to him.
Yeah.
So my like if we were going to give our toilet talk tips now, that would be mine. Go and read Proverbs, because Proverbs is all about the man with one chapter about the woman. And I think that anyone can glean wisdom from Proverbs. It is in the wisdom literature. But flip to Proverbs 1 and start out with, to know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, and so forth. That's where you need to start. And this is probably where I think would be interesting to maybe move the discussion is, how should a man prepare for marriage, even if he's not yet interested in someone? You know, how does he start laying the groundwork now? And I would probably just say, start reading Proverbs 1 through 30, and how do you embody the wisdom there? You know, I think you should always, regardless of whether or not you're interested in someone, you need to be constantly moving toward Christ. And Proverbs is all about obtaining the wisdom that you find in him. And well, it is obtaining him, right? Is like that's what wisdom is. But so I guess that's like, just broadly speaking, go to Proverbs and find the wisdom that the Lord sets in there for pursuing a righteous woman. And that comes at the cost of laying down your life for 30 chapters previously.
Yeah.
So
if I can tag on to what you just said, I love that advice. I think it's fantastic. And I just wanted to make this as kind of a side note, but it'll be a little bit of a long tangent.
Okay.
In the New Testament, husbands are called to be as Christ to their wives.
Right.
Well, it's interesting to note that Proverbs, wisdom is referring to the person of Jesus Christ, which seems a little counterintuitive, right? Because wisdom is referred to as a woman. Right. But that's primarily just because the Hebrew adjective wisdom is feminine. But if you look back to Genesis and you hear about the word and wisdom, being in the beginning with God, and then you look to First John. You can tie all of this together and do your own study on this,
right.
if what I'm saying sounds crazy. But a lot smarter guys than I have done an analysis on it. Dr. Ben Merkel has a really good sermon actually breaking down all of the scripture that shows this to be the case. All that to say, Proverbs 1 through 30, talking about the person of Christ and wisdom.
Right.
And then being told to embody or act like Christ to your wives. It kind of brings it all together.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. Proverbs 1 through 30 is something that future husbands need to have as good of a grasp on as they can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Proverbs is fantastic.
It is.
So all that. Moving on though, your question was what do we think guys preparing for courtship should think about?
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say this is again just a thing I've heard from I believe it's my pastor. Who says this occasionally.
Yeah.
He says to make yourself, I'm paraphrasing but make yourself like the person that the person you would want to marry would want to marry.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Right?
No, that's spot on.
Make yourself attractive to the type of person you'd want to marry effectively.
Yeah.
And I think this is a valuable exercise to think through because you'll realize, wait a second, if I want this type of woman, she's going to look at that and be like, hey, goodbye.
Right. Right.
And it'll help you pick up on things that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise notice. So I think it's definitely a valuable exercise. That's just the first thing that pops into my mind. But if we're going to start a list, we have read Proverbs 1 through 30. Think about how are you being attractive to the type of person you want to marry.
Right.
Next up, I know I've said this many, many times, but read Ecclesiastes again.
Yes, I'm almost through. Almost through it.
Yeah, Isaac and I were talking about this beforehand, so I wanted to bring it up again.
Yeah.
Ecclesiastes is just wonderfully useful for everything, and maybe it's not as much preparation for courtship as it is preparation for marriage in my mind. Yeah. But if you're courting somebody or if you're engaged, you've already read Proverbs 500 times. Great. Keep reading that, but read Ecclesiastes too. Because there is a lot, just throughout all of life, there is a lot of repetition and a lot of tedium. And that's fine. That's normal. But one thing that you'll notice is when you're single, there's a little bit less repetition because you have the freedom to kind of, I'm going to do something else at this time, and it doesn't matter because nobody else is relying on me. Right. But once you're married, you will settle into more of a rhythm, and even more so once you start having kids. Right. You'll be forced to settle into a rhythm. You'll be forced to go home at 8:30 so the kids can get to sleep, or whatever the case may be. And at that point, you'll be glad that you read Ecclesiastes 5,500 times. Yeah. So I think that's all I've got on so far. Do you have any other practical tips?
Well, I would say if you're wondering, because Kip mentioned earlier about how you're really kind of at the behest of the Father, whether, whatever he sets in front of you, you should be ready to do or ready to figure out, how do I accomplish those goals and answer those questions honestly. In preparation for that, you should go read a blog post Pastor Wilson wrote, I think it was like 7 years ago. He wrote one entitled 21 Questions for Prospective Suitor. He wrote it for fathers in his church. And I have to tell you, some of the questions are really gonna knock you down. And so you might want to prepare for those now. So I will link that below, but I would actually say you should go read those because I think it's a good litmus test for if you don't have a good answer, and you need to be able to answer all of these honestly because no one wants their daughter marrying a liar. right?
Yeah.
So actually look into, are we doing good on time there?
Yeah, we're cool. About 31 minutes, so we can keep rolling.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the questions, we've kind of touched on how many brothers and sisters you have, how do you get along with them, which is kind of putting that person into context of their family, which is what we've talked about with courtship. And then, this is what you would really like this question. How much money did you make last year? Do you pay your bills on time? How much debt have you accumulated? Please describe the nature of your debts, and then list them out. So there's some really honest questions in there that I think guys should wrestle with. And it's a quick read. And also it just helps you become a better human being.
Yeah.
So I would add that to the list.
I would going off of that, I have a couple things to say.
Yeah.
First of all, you mentioned that if you're wanting to court or are courting somebody, you are kind of at the behest of the father. And that is true, but here's another point that, look at me, the voice of reason.
You are really, you are.
It's not usually the case. I just want to add here that in this situation, while you are at the behest of the father, if you want to marry this girl, you are still in a position where you have not married her,
right? And
you don't have to do what he says. If he says something that you think is just flat unbiblical, and
totally, yeah.
Nobody's perfect, so that might happen,
right?
I think it's pretty rare, but it might happen that you can just say, sorry, no thanks, and you can leave. Like you can do that.
Yeah,
that is allowed.
That's true.
That's not wrong.
True. Yeah.
But generally speaking, I totally agree with
you.
Yeah. I can't remember what the next thing was that I was going to say. I should have had a notepad in front of me, but darn, that was really good. Well,
that's what we get for recording at 7 a.m. So
I guess so, yeah.
But
it was 6:52.
6:52. Yeah, that's right. We did start earlier.
Yeah. Well, do you have any other questions, Isaac?
No, I think that wraps it up pretty well, actually, right there.
Okay.
Just keep it short and sweet today. But
sounds good.
Do you have anything else you want to pipe in on? Okay, you got your point back.
I do remember what I was about to say.
Okay, cool.
So I really like those, I think, 21 questions that Pastor Doug posted. But just to kind of, for young guys maybe who have no idea what this is going to look like.
Right.
It doesn't always end up that way. So be prepared to give honest answers to all of those questions and more. Mm-hmm. Maybe ask your dad or your mom.
Yeah.
What would you, maybe your parents also have daughters.
Right.
Ask them, what would you do if somebody came asking about this girl? And then do a practice run with your parents.
Right.
And maybe you'll pick out some things that you need to work on. Maybe you'll figure out that you're not prepared to answer this question and you need to pray about it, whatever the case may be. But just be prepared that it's different every time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, for example, my now father-in-law, the first time I called him, he kind of asked me a couple of questions.
Okay.
But he pretty much just said, I've talked to literally every elder who knows you at all. And he didn't tell me what he thought about it until the end of the conversation. But I think we still talked for about an hour, so he must have asked me some questions. But he basically didn't ask any of the normal questions. Yeah. He was just like, I've already asked all of the questions.
Right.
I was like, oh golly, what does that mean? And he said, well, at the end of the conversation, he was like, yeah, I mean, you're good. But he let me hang on the end of the rope for like an hour-long conversation. It was pretty hilarious. But,
no, and I mean, to kind of chime in there to reinforce the point that it probably won't be like this all the time. My experience with my father-in-law when we sat down to get coffee was not like this.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like first of all, I sped read through Proverbs right before our meeting, and then I read the 21 questions because I had been searching for it for days and couldn't come across it on his blog. I don't know what kind of words I was using in the search engine that didn't get me that, but because I found this in 5 minutes. Yeah. but when we sat down to have coffee, it was more. There seemed to be more of a when just an acknowledgement that Ruth and I both knew what we were doing, and that there is more of a. He knew what family I came from, and he knew his own daughter. And if our parents have done their work well, then there shouldn't be a need to have a grilling, right?
Yeah.
But these questions, I mean, that doesn't mean every father's going to take that approach.
Yeah.
But when we sat down, it was more of like, tell me about yourself. I want to get to know you as a person. Then throughout the courtship, we talked every other week on the phone for like an hour or so, getting to know each other, because I think that was a good way for him to know, okay, who's this Isaac character? But yeah.
I think I remember now a little bit, but because what you pointed out is really interesting there. How Ruth's dad knew the family you were coming from. And he knew his own daughter, and so there were less concerns. And I think that is true, because my dad left when I was 1, so that's an automatic red flag for the father, right? Like, oh, this kid's gonna have problems, right? And so I think the only 2 questions he asked me on that phone call were regarding that.
Okay, gotcha.
And the rest of it, I think we were just chatting and getting to know each other. But maybe I'm wrong. He probably grilled me.
Yeah, well, I mean, you had concussion, so...
Right, there we go.
You forgot it.
The trifecta. We brought it up 3 times as an excuse now. Nice. Well, any other closing thoughts, Isaac?
No, I think just really to conclude my preparation and all of this and what I've had to say is just really, if you're single, don't lose the joy of that singleness. Like, don't get so caught up in I want to be in a relationship, because Paul talks about how singleness is actually a gift. Use it while you have it. You kind of mentioned it earlier, how there's not as much of a rhythm. You can be a bit more spontaneous, help people as much as possible, right? Just go out of your way, because soon you're going to be invested in just a few people's lives, which is, I think, the natural progression of life. But as you move into I'm interested in getting married, you're going to be better prepared if you've been living selflessly for longer when you've had the opportunity to live selfishly. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great spot to end on.
Okay.
So thanks for listening, everybody. And with that, for the Cut and the Dry on the Life Given Radio, this is Kip and Isaac signing off.